Rain drummed against the windshield of the old Toyota, each drop a small fist of doubt. Naomi Carter sat perfectly still, watching the boy through the blur. He stood on the marble steps of the Reed mansion, small hands pressed against his sides, staring at nothing. 6 years old and carved from silence. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. Not yet. The gate buzzed open. A woman in a gray suit, clipboard, heels, impatience, strode towards the car. Naomi rolled down the window halfway. "Miss Carter, you're late." "Traffic," Naomi said softly. Her eyes never left the child. "Is that Ethan?" "That's the client, yes." The woman, Claire Monroe, HR manager, glanced back at the boy with professional detachment. "Mr. Reed is waiting inside. He values punctuality." Naomi opened the door. Rain kissed her cheeks. She walked past Claire, past the fountain with its crystalline geometry, and knelt on the wet steps 3 feet from Ethan. She didn't touch him, didn't speak at first. The boy's eyes flickered toward her, just once, then away. Naomi set her worn canvas bag beside her knee and pulled out a small wooden xylophone. She tapped 2 notes. C and G, simple. Waiting. Ethan's shoulders shifted. Not much, just a breath. "We'll start when you're ready," Naomi said, voice barely above the rain. "Not when they expect you to." Behind her, Claire cleared her throat. "Miss Carter, Mr. Reed is—" "Listening," a man's voice interrupted. Naomi turned. Jonathan Reed stood in the doorway, tall, expensive suit, face carved from granite and exhaustion. But his eyes, gray as the sky, were fixed on his son. On the boy who hadn't moved. Who was, for the first time in 14 months, leaning forward. Toward the sound. The Reed house wasn't a home. It was an architectural statement. Glass and steel, white marble, art that cost more than most people's houses. Every surface gleamed, every corner calculated. Naomi followed Jonathan through the foyer, her sneakers squeaking softly against the floor. Ethan trailed behind them, 3 steps back, always 3 steps back. His previous therapists lasted 2 weeks each, Jonathan said, without looking at her. His voice was efficient, boardroom flat. Speech pathologists, developmental specialists, a behavioral psychologist from Johns Hopkins, none of them reached him. Maybe they were trying to fix something that isn't broken. Jonathan stopped walking, turned. "My son hasn't spoken in over a year, Miss Carter. That requires intervention." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "Or it requires patience." Something flickered behind his eyes. Quick, painful, gone. They reached what he called the learning room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. A table with ergonomic chairs. Shelves lined with educational materials, all color-coded, all untouched. "This is where you'll work," Jonathan said. 6 weeks. That's the trial period. If Ethan shows measurable progress, verifiable, documented progress, we'll discuss an extension. And if he doesn't, then we try something else. He adjusted his cufflink, platinum glinting. "I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Mrs. Foster, our housekeeper, will answer any questions. Dinner is at 6. Ethan eats at 6:15. Separately? It's easier that way." Naomi glanced at Ethan, who stood in the doorway studying the rain-streaked windows. "Easier for who?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. He checked his watch and left without answering. Naomi waited until his footsteps faded. Then she noticed something on one of the shelves, a framed photo. A woman with golden hair, laughing, holding a tiny Ethan. Rebecca. She looked down. Ethan had moved beside her, staring at the same photo. "Your mama was beautiful," Naomi whispered. Ethan's small fingers touched the glass. Just for a moment. Then he walked to the window where a bird had landed. Naomi followed, pulled out her phone and played a recording. Birdsong. Simple. Gentle. Ethan's hand stilled, his head tilted, listening. "Sometimes," Naomi whispered, "we speak in ways that don't use words." Later, in the kitchen, Mrs. Foster, kind face, flour on her apron, poured Naomi sweet tea. "You'll want to know about the mother," she said quietly, eyes on the doorway. "Rebecca, beautiful woman, died 3 years ago. Car accident. Ethan was in the back seat." Naomi's chest tightened. "He witnessed it? Witnessed it, survived it, stopped talking the day of her funeral." Mrs. Foster wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Reed, he tried everything, every specialist money could buy, and Mr. Reed has billions, the kind of wealth that opens any door. But money can't buy a voice back." "What about connection?" Mrs. Foster smiled sadly. "That man doesn't know how to sit still long enough to just be present, honey. Every morning at 5:30, Rebecca's alarm goes off. Has for 3 years. He won't turn it off, won't move past it, just lets it ring and ring while he gets ready for work, like she's still here." Naomi set down her tea. 3 years? Like if he turns it off, he's losing her all over again. Mrs. Foster shook her head. "That house is full of ghosts, child. You're here to help the little one find his voice, but maybe—" She glanced toward the hallway, where Jonathan's office door was closed. "Maybe you'll help his daddy remember how to hear." That night, Naomi sat in her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of collard greens and cornbread filling the small row house in southwest Atlanta. Everything here felt lived in, loved in, so different from the Reed mansion's cold perfection. Helen Carter, 65, church choir director, hands that had held 3 generations, set a plate in front of her granddaughter. "Tell me about the boy." Naomi pushed rice around her plate. "He's lost, scared, carrying grief too big for his small shoulders, and his father's trying to science his way through it all. And you? I'm supposed to make him talk in 6 weeks, Nana. 6 weeks or I'm out." She looked up, fear pooling in her eyes. "What if I can't?" Helen covered Naomi's hand with her own. "Baby girl, healing doesn't work on a billionaire's schedule. You know that." "Then maybe I shouldn't have taken the job." "Maybe," Helen said gently. "That man needs to learn what you already know. That sometimes silence is also a prayer, a way of holding what words can't carry." Naomi studied her grandmother's face. "What if he fires me before I can help Ethan?" "Then you'll have planted a seed, and seeds grow in their own time." Helen squeezed her hand. "You've always had kindness in your bones, Naomi. Don't let his walls make you forget that. Don't let his control make you doubt your gift." Naomi nodded slowly, but doubt still whispered in the corners of her mind. "Have you ever met someone who needed to remember how to listen? If this story is touching your heart, would you consider subscribing? There's so much more ahead." 3 weeks in, and Ethan had yet to speak. But he hummed. Naomi discovered it by accident. She'd been playing You Are My Sunshine on her phone while they drew pictures together. Ethan's crayon had stilled, his mouth had opened just slightly, and a sound emerged. Tentative, fragile, a hum. She'd nearly wept. Now, every afternoon, they sat by the window, drawing, listening, humming together. Ethan's pictures were always variations of the same theme: a woman with yellow hair, a car, a small figure in the back seat, sometimes sunshine, sometimes rain, sometimes just darkness. Naomi never asked him to explain. She just sat beside him, present and patient, letting him process trauma at his own pace. But she noticed something else. In the margins of his drawings, Ethan had started adding small details. A bird, a xylophone, a hand reaching out. Progress. Tiny, fragile, but real. One afternoon, as they worked together, Jonathan appeared in the doorway. He'd started doing that, watching from a distance, as if afraid to disrupt whatever was happening. Ethan didn't acknowledge his father's presence, just kept humming and coloring. Naomi glanced at Jonathan, saw the longing on his face, the desire to connect, the fear that he'd lost that right. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "would you like to join us?" Ethan's crayon stopped moving. Jonathan hesitated. "I don't want to interrupt." "You're not." Naomi gestured to the empty chair. "We're just drawing and listening to music." Jonathan entered slowly, like a man approaching something precious and breakable. He sat down across from Ethan. The boy kept his eyes on his drawing. "What are you drawing, buddy?" Jonathan asked, voice gentler than Naomi had ever heard it. Silence. Jonathan's face fell. "Right, sorry, I'll just—" Ethan pushed a blank piece of paper toward his father, then a crayon. Blue. Jonathan stared at the paper like it was a miracle. "He wants you to draw with him," Naomi said softly. Jonathan picked up the crayon with trembling hands. "I'm not very good at this." Ethan looked up for the first time, pointed to the paper. A clear instruction. "Try anyway." So Jonathan drew. Clumsy stick figures and misshapen trees, nothing like the expensive art on his walls. But his son watched and hummed, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, moved his chair closer. Naomi felt her throat tighten. This is healing. They sat like that for 40 minutes, drawing, humming, 3 people sharing space without words. When it was time for Naomi to leave, Jonathan walked her to the door. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me be part of it. I know I've been—" He paused, searching for words. "Difficult." "You've been scared," Naomi corrected gently. "There's a difference." Jonathan looked back toward the learning room, where Ethan was still drawing. "I don't know how to reach him anymore. I don't know if I ever did." "You're reaching him now, one crayon at a time." Something in Jonathan's expression shifted, softened. "Is this what Rebecca would have done?" Naomi chose her words carefully. "I think she would have reminded you that love doesn't always look like solving. Sometimes it just looks like sitting." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I'm trying to learn that. I can see that you are." But not everyone was pleased with the progress. The next morning, Naomi arrived to find Claire waiting with another tablet, another spreadsheet, another assessment. "Miss Carter, we need to discuss Ethan's metrics. He's humming, he's engaging, he's starting to initiate connection. He's not speaking. That was the goal." Claire's tone was professional but cold. "The board is asking questions. Mr. Reed's personal investment in unconventional methods is raising concerns about his judgment." Naomi felt anger flare. "The board? This is about a child, not a business decision." "Mr. Reed is proposing a $20 million pediatric trauma wing based on your methods. That makes it a business decision." Claire adjusted her glasses. "We need measurable outcomes. Data, not feelings and folk songs. Trauma recovery doesn't fit on a spreadsheet." "Then perhaps you're in the wrong field, Miss Carter." Claire's smile didn't reach her eyes. Or at least, the wrong environment. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Naomi held her ground. "I'm here for Ethan, not for your board, not for your metrics, for that little boy who lost his mother and needs someone to meet him where he is." "How noble." Claire's tone dripped with condescension. But nobility doesn't fund research programs. Mr. Reed's reputation does. And right now, you're putting that at risk. She walked away, heels clicking against marble. Naomi stood there, shaking with frustration and something deeper. Fear. Because Claire was right about one thing. Her time was running out. That afternoon, Jonathan appeared in the doorway again. But this time, something was different. His expression was troubled. "Miss Carter, can we talk?" They stepped into the hallway while Ethan drew, oblivious. "Claire briefed me on her concerns," Jonathan began. Naomi's stomach dropped. "Mr. Reed, she thinks I'm making a mistake, that I'm letting personal desperation cloud my judgment." He ran a hand through his hair. "And maybe she's right." "You don't believe that." "I don't know what I believe anymore." He looked exhausted. "I've built my entire career on data, on evidence-based decisions, and now I'm gambling everything on humming and crayons because my son moved his chair closer to me." "That wasn't gambling. That was your son choosing to be near you for the first time in months." "But is it enough?" Jonathan's voice cracked. "Is it enough to justify turning my company upside down? To risk everything I've built?" Naomi took a breath. "Mr. Reed, I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you this. Your son is healing. Slowly, quietly, but healing. If you stop now, if you replace me with someone who treats him like a problem to solve instead of a person to know, you'll lose more than time. You'll lose his trust." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. "What if you're wrong? What if 3 more weeks go by and he still doesn't speak? Then we'll cross that bridge. But don't give up on him now, not when he's starting to reach back." Jonathan looked toward the learning room, where Ethan was holding up a new drawing. A small figure and a tall figure side by side. "Okay," he said finally. "We keep going. But Miss Carter." "Naomi. Please, just call me Naomi." He nodded. "Naomi, we keep going. But I need you to understand what's at stake here. If this fails, I don't just lose my credibility. I lose the funding for every other child who might need this kind of help." "Then we won't fail," Naomi said, with more confidence than she felt. But as Jonathan walked away, she wondered if that was a promise she could keep. But Jonathan didn't understand patience. 1 week later, everything came to a head. "This isn't a music class, Miss Carter." He stood in the doorway of the learning room, arms crossed, jaw set. Behind him, Claire held a tablet, her expression carefully neutral but assessing. Naomi didn't stand. She kept her eyes on Ethan, who'd gone rigid at his father's tone. "It's a connection class," she said softly. "We hired you to restore his speech, not to sing lullabies. Music accesses parts of the brain that direct language can't reach, especially in trauma cases. The melody creates a safe pathway. I've read the research." Jonathan stepped into the room. "I've also read your contract. Measurable progress, Miss Carter. Where are the assessments? The documented improvements?" Claire lifted the tablet. "In 3 weeks, there's been no recorded verbal output, not a single word. The board is asking questions about the allocation of resources to experimental methods." Naomi finally looked up. "He's humming. That's neurological output. That's his brain rebuilding pathways to expression. Humming isn't speaking. It's a foundation. Speech will come." Jonathan's hands flexed at his sides. "I'm paying you for results, not foundations. Ethan needs functional communication for school, for social development. Ethan needs to feel safe." The words came out sharper than Naomi intended. She took a breath, steadied her voice. "Mr. Reed, your son isn't a problem to solve. He's a child processing profound trauma. He watched his mother die. That kind of loss doesn't heal on a corporate timeline." The room went silent. Jonathan's face paled. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her professional mask slipping. Ethan's crayon snapped in his small hand. The sound cracked through the tension. "That's enough," Jonathan said, voice low and dangerous. "Claire, a word outside." They left. The door closed with a soft, terrible click. Naomi knelt beside Ethan, who was staring at the broken crayon, tears sliding down his cheeks without sound, without breath, without release. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That wasn't about you. That was grown-up frustration, and you didn't deserve to hear it." She reached for him slowly, carefully, giving him the choice. He collapsed into her arms, shaking, and hummed, the same melody, "You Are My Sunshine." Through the window, rain began to fall again, soft and forgiving. That evening, Jonathan sat in his office, whiskey untouched on the desk, staring at quarterly reports that suddenly felt meaningless. Claire's voice was measured, professional. "We could terminate her contract, bring in someone more conventional, someone who follows established protocols and understands boundaries." She made him cry. "He's been crying for 3 years, Jonathan. You just haven't been in the room to see it." Claire paused, choosing her words carefully. "And with respect, the board is concerned. You've allocated significant resources to this trial. They want data, metrics, not folk remedies and intuition." Jonathan turned sharply. "The board doesn't get a vote on my son's care." "They do when you're proposing a multi-million-dollar pediatric wing based on alternative therapeutic approaches. They're questioning your judgment." Claire set her tablet down. "I'm sorry, but you hired me to protect this company and your reputation. Right now, Naomi Carter is a risk." "She's trying to help him." "Is she? Or is she just another person who doesn't understand what Ethan really needs?" Claire's tone softened, almost sympathetic. "Jonathan, you've built a medical technology empire. You've revolutionized diagnostics, saved thousands of lives. Trust the science, not the sentiment." Jonathan looked through his office window. Outside, in the garden, he could see the light from Ethan's bedroom glowing softly in the dusk. His son's room, where Ethan slept alone, ate alone, grieved alone. When did I stop going in there? When did I stop being his father and become his manager? "Give her 2 more weeks, he said quietly. "Jonathan, 2 more weeks, Claire. Then we'll reassess." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe he was letting desperation cloud his judgment. Maybe science, not song, was the answer. Maybe he was failing his son all over again. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m, he found himself standing outside Ethan's door. He could hear soft sounds from inside, whimpering. Nightmare. Jonathan's hand went to the doorknob, then froze. What would he do? What would he say? He didn't know how to comfort his son anymore, didn't know if he ever had. After a moment, the sounds stopped, but Jonathan stayed there, hand on the doorknob, paralyzed by his own inadequacy. Finally, he went back to his own room, where Rebecca's alarm would ring in 3 hours, where it had rung every morning for 3 years, where he would let it ring again tomorrow because turning it off meant admitting she was really gone. And if he admitted that, he'd have to admit he was alone in this. And he didn't know if he was strong enough for that. It happened on a Thursday night. Naomi had stayed late. Ethan had been drawing for hours, finally engaged, and she didn't have the heart to interrupt his process. Mrs. Foster had left dinner in the fridge. The house was quiet, settling into evening shadows. Then, at 9:47, the screaming started. Naomi ran, her heart hammering, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She found Ethan in his bedroom, tangled in sheets, eyes wide and unseeing. Night terror, his small body thrashed against invisible horrors, reliving the crash, reliving the loss. Ethan, honey, it's okay. You're safe. He didn't hear her. Couldn't hear her. Trapped in the nightmare. Jonathan burst through the door seconds later, hair disheveled, shirt unbuttoned, raw fear on his face. What happened? Night terror. Don't touch him yet. He's still asleep, still trapped in it. But Jonathan was already reaching for his son, trying to wake him forcefully, and Ethan's screams intensified, became more desperate. Mr. Reed, stop! You'll frighten him more! He's my son! Then trust me to help him. Naomi gently but firmly moved between them and sat on the edge of the bed. Not touching. Just close. Just present. And she sang. You are my sunshine. My only sunshine. Ethan's screaming faltered, stuttered. His thrashing slowed. You make me happy when skies are gray. His eyes began to focus. Found Naomi. Found the melody. Found the safety in her voice. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Ethan's mouth opened, and for the first time in 14 months, a sound came out. Not a hum, a word. Light. Barely a whisper, cracked and small and miraculous, but real, unmistakably real. Please don't take my sunshine away! Naomi finished the song, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling with the weight of the moment. Jonathan stood frozen in the doorway, one hand pressed to his mouth, his entire world shifting. Ethan looked at his father through tear-filled eyes. Light, he said again, reaching out with small, desperate hands. Jonathan moved, dropped to his knees beside the bed, pulled his son into his arms and held him like he should have been holding him all along, and wept. Deep, gasping sobs of relief and regret and hope. Naomi slipped from the room, closing the door softly behind her, giving them this moment. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, shaking, overwhelmed. He spoke. Oh God, he actually spoke. She didn't know that on the other side of the door, Jonathan was holding his son, feeling the miracle of that single word, understanding for the first time what he'd been too afraid to see. That control wasn't the same as care. That protocols weren't the same as presence. That maybe his late wife had been right all along about what their son really needed. The next morning, Naomi arrived to find Claire waiting in the driveway, envelope in hand. Miss Carter, a moment, please. Something in her tone made Naomi's stomach drop. Claire handed her the envelope. Your final payment. The contract has been terminated. What? Mr. Reed reviewed the security footage from last night. You violated protocol by remaining in the house after hours without authorization. Furthermore, your methods have been deemed inappropriate for this environment. Ethan spoke. He said his first word in over a year. Under extreme duress. That's not the kind of breakthrough Mr. Reed is looking for. Claire's expression was polished steel. There's also the matter of the confidentiality agreement you signed. All therapy details remain private. You're not to discuss Ethan's case with anyone, including what happened last night. Legal will be in touch to ensure compliance. Naomi stared at her, disbelief warring with anger. You can't be serious. The decision is final. Mr. Reed has already approved a new specialist from Boston Children's Hospital, someone with proper credentials and established methodologies. Claire adjusted her tablet with practiced efficiency. I'm sure you understand. This is a high-profile family. We need proven approaches. This isn't about methodology. This is about a child who finally felt safe enough to speak. Thank you for your service, Miss Carter. Claire turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement with mechanical precision. Naomi stood there, envelope crumpling in her fist, staring at the mansion's windows, looking for Jonathan, for any sign that this was a terrible mistake. But the windows remained dark, empty. He fired me, after his son spoke. After everything. He actually fired me. She got in her car and sat there for a long moment, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then she drove to the only place that made sense. Home. Helen took one look at her granddaughter's face and pulled her into a hug. "What happened, baby?" The story came out in broken pieces. Ethan's first word, the security footage, the termination. Helen listened, her face growing more troubled with each detail. "That man's afraid," she said finally. "Of what? His son spoke? Isn't that what he wanted?" "He's afraid of what it means, that he's been doing everything wrong, that a stranger reached his son when he couldn't. That's a hard truth to swallow, especially for a man used to being in control." Helen poured them both tea. "But that don't make it right what he did to you." Naomi wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I should have known better. Should have protected myself better. Baby girl, you can't protect yourself and truly help someone at the same time. Sometimes healing requires being vulnerable. You did that. You showed up. You took the risk. That's not something to regret. Then why does it hurt so much?" "Because you care. Because that boy got under your skin, into your heart, and his daddy—" Helen paused, giving Naomi a knowing look. "Maybe he did too." Naomi shook her head. "It wasn't like that." "Wasn't it? I saw how you talked about him. Not just the frustration, but the understanding underneath. The hope that he could be better." Helen squeezed her hand. "Sometimes we fall for people's potential before we fall for who they are." Naomi felt tears threatening again. "Well, it doesn't matter now. It's over. Maybe. Maybe not." Helen stood, moved to the window. "Seeds take time to grow, remember? You planted something in that house, in that boy, in that man. Don't be so quick to think it's over." But 2 days passed, then 3. No word from Jonathan. No apology. Nothing. Naomi tried to move on, applied for positions at other clinics, took on extra hours at the community center. Anything to stop thinking about Ethan's small voice saying light in the darkness. But every night she dreamed of him, of his drawings, of his humming, of the trust she'd built and lost. And every morning she woke up angry at Jonathan for firing her, at Claire for being so cold, at herself for caring so much. Inside the Reed mansion, things were falling apart. Jonathan sat in his office, staring at the security footage paused on his screen. Naomi, sitting beside Ethan's bed, singing, his son's mouth forming that miraculous word. Light. He'd watched it 50 times, maybe more. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire. "New specialist arrives Monday. All arrangements confirmed." His thumb hovered over the reply. He should feel relief. He should feel confident in this decision. He felt nothing but hollowness. Then a sound made him look up. In the doorway stood Ethan, clutching a piece of paper. His son's face was streaked with silent tears. "Daddy?" Second word, third time speaking. Each one a gift. Jonathan's heart broke and rebuilt simultaneously. Ethan came forward slowly, one careful step at a time, and held up the drawing. 3 figures, drawn in crayon. A tall man, a small boy, and a woman with kind eyes and dark skin. Underneath, in shaky letters that Mrs. Foster must have helped him trace. "This is my family." "Where is Miss Naomi?" Ethan whispered, his voice raw and urgent. Jonathan couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Find her," Ethan said, and his voice cracked with a pain too big for his small body. "Please, Daddy, find her. Bring her home." The drawing fluttered to the floor between them, and Jonathan understood, with terrible, crushing clarity, what he'd done. He'd chosen control over connection, management over love, fear over faith. Again, Mrs. Foster appeared in the doorway, her expression stern. "Mr. Reed, that boy hasn't eaten in 2 days. Won't sleep, won't draw, just sits by the window waiting for her." Her voice shook with rare anger. "You need to fix this." "I don't know if I can." "Then you better learn how." Mrs. Foster picked up the drawing, handed it to him. "Because that child just found his voice, and you're about to teach him that speaking up doesn't matter. Is that the lesson you want him to learn?" She left. Jonathan looked at the drawing in his hands, at the 3 figures holding hands, at the family his son had chosen. He thought about Rebecca, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd be furious, and she'd be right. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Helen Carter, this is Jonathan Reed. I need your address." 2 days later, Jonathan Reed pulled up to a row house in southwest Atlanta. The driveway was cracked. The porch light flickered. A small garden grew fierce and wild beside the steps, collard greens and tomatoes thriving despite the modest soil. He'd never felt more out of place in his life. Helen answered the door before he could knock. "Mr. Reed." "Mrs. Carter, I'm here to—" "I know why you're here. Question is whether Naomi wants to hear it." She left the door open. Invitation and test. Jonathan stepped inside. The house smelled like Sunday dinner and old books and real life. Photos lined every wall, graduation pictures, church gatherings, a young Naomi with missing front teeth. Love, captured and displayed. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, tea going cold in her hands. She didn't look up when he entered. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said. "For which part?" Her voice was quiet. Careful. "Firing me? Invalidating my work? Or making me sign legal documents that treat your son's healing like corporate espionage?" "All of it." He stayed in the doorway, respecting the distance. "You were right. I've been trying to manage Ethan's grief like a business problem. Metrics, timelines, deliverables. I thought I was protecting him. I was just controlling the only thing I had left." Naomi finally looked at him. "He spoke, Mr. Reed. Your son found his voice, and you pushed me away." "I know. Do you?" She stood. "Because from where I'm sitting, I'm just another contractor, another temporary solution. The black woman with the unconventional methods who's good enough for the trial period, but not good enough to stay when it really matters." The words hit him like a physical blow. "That's not—" Jonathan stopped, took a breath, started again. "You're right. I didn't see you. I saw a risk, a liability, someone who didn't fit the protocols I'd convinced myself mattered more than results, more than my son's actual well-being." He met her eyes, and I was terrified. "Of what?" "Of the fact that you helped him in 3 weeks when I'd failed for 3 years. That you knew what he needed when I, his own father, didn't." The words hung between them. Raw, true. Helen spoke from the kitchen doorway, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "Mr. Reed, my granddaughter doesn't need an apology that makes you feel better. She needs to know that if she comes back, things will actually be different." Jonathan turned to her. "They will be." "How?" Naomi asked. "You going to fire Claire? Rip up the confidentiality agreement? Give me full autonomy?" "Yes." Both women stared at him. "All of it," Jonathan said. "I'll restructure everything. No legal restrictions. No protocols beyond what you determine best serves each child. And I'm not asking you to come back as a contractor." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I'm asking you to direct something bigger, a trauma recovery program, fully funded. Your methods, your team, your vision." He set architectural plans on the table. The Rebecca Reed Center for Child Advocacy. Naomi's hands trembled as she unfolded the plans. A building, gardens, music rooms, Safe spaces designed for healing, not management, not control. My wife believed that healing came from connection, Jonathan said softly. I forgot that. You remembered. And Ethan... His voice broke. He pulled out the drawing, the one with 3 figures. Ethan drew this after you left. He wrote, "This is my family," underneath. Tears slid down Naomi's cheeks. He's been asking for you every day, Jonathan continued. He stopped eating, stopped drawing. The new specialist lasted 1 session before Ethan crawled under the table and refused to come out. He looked at Helen, then back at Naomi. You're not just another contractor. You're the person who taught my son it's safe to speak, and you're teaching me it's safe to feel again. Helen's voice was gentle. Naomi, baby girl, the choice is always yours. Naomi looked at the drawing, at the 3 crayon figures holding hands, at Jonathan, standing in her grandmother's kitchen, vulnerability written across his face in ways she suspected he'd never shown anyone. No more corporate control, she said. No more metrics that don't measure what actually matters. No more treating Ethan like a project. Agreed. And I want Nana Helen on the advisory board for the center. Her voice, her wisdom. From day 1. Jonathan nodded. Done. And Claire is being reassigned to a different division. She's skilled, but she lost sight of what matters. I should have seen it sooner. Should have trusted my gut instead of her data. Naomi folded the plans carefully. Then I'll come back. For Ethan. And for every other child who needs someone to listen instead of fix. She extended her hand. Jonathan took it. And Helen, watching from the kitchen, whispered, We fix machines, Mr. Reed. We heal people. Jonathan met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. I'm learning that now. The ride back to the Reed mansion was quiet. Naomi sat in the passenger seat of Jonathan's car, sleek, expensive, so different from her old Toyota, watching the city lights blur past. He's going to be asleep, Jonathan said. But I thought maybe you could see him anyway, just so he knows you're back, so he can rest. Okay. They pulled through the gates. The fountain gleamed in the darkness, water catching moonlight. Inside, Mrs. Foster waited in the foyer, relief flooding her face. Oh, thank the Lord. That boy's been inconsolable. They climbed the stairs together, Jonathan leading. At Ethan's door, he paused. Thank you, he whispered, for giving us another chance, for coming back. Naomi squeezed his arm gently. They entered. Ethan was awake, of course he was, sitting in bed surrounded by drawings, all of them variations of the same image, 3 figures, the family he'd chosen. When he saw Naomi, his face crumpled with relief and joy. Miss Naomi! She crossed to him, knelt beside the bed. Hey, sweetheart. You came back. I came back, and I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore. Ethan threw his arms around her neck and sobbed. Not silent tears this time. Real, gasping, healing sobs that released 3 years of grief and fear. Naomi held him, rocking gently. I'm here. I'm right here. Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching his son release what he'd been holding, understanding what Helen had meant. This wasn't about contracts or credentials or corporate strategy. This was about showing up, about choosing to stay when staying was hard, about love. When Ethan finally pulled back, hiccuping and exhausted but lighter, he looked between Naomi and his father. Then he picked up his newest drawing, the one with 3 figures. This is my family, he said clearly, firmly, as if speaking it aloud sealed it into truth. Yeah, buddy, Jonathan said, voice thick with emotion. It is. Naomi met Jonathan's eyes over Ethan's head. And something passed between them. Understanding, partnership, recognition. This is what healing looks like. They stayed with Ethan until he fell asleep, one hand clutching Naomi's, the other reaching for his father. In the hallway, Jonathan and Naomi stood in the soft light. "I have something else to show you," Jonathan said quietly, "if you have a moment." He led her downstairs to his office. On his desk sat Rebecca's alarm clock, unplugged. "I turned it off this morning," he said, "after 3 years, after you left." He touched it gently. "I realized I was holding on to grief instead of memory, that I was so afraid of losing her that I'd forgotten how to live." Naomi's throat tightened. "That must have been hard." "It was, but it was also right." He looked at her. "You gave me my son back, but you also gave me something else. Permission to move forward without feeling like I was betraying her. Rebecca would want you to be happy. I think she'd want a lot of things. And I think—" He smiled softly. "I think she'd really like you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "The center," Naomi said. "Are you serious about it?" "Completely. I've already talked to the board, allocated the initial funding, identified the property." He pulled up blueprints on his computer. "But I need you to lead it, your vision, your values. I'll provide resources and support, but this has to be yours." Naomi studied the plans. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of. A place where children could heal without timelines, where families could rebuild without shame. "When do we start?" she asked. Jonathan smiled. "Monday?" "Monday." Over the next few months, Naomi watched Jonathan transform. He started eating dinner with Ethan. Every night, no excuses. He learned to draw badly, but Ethan loved it anyway. He began attending Helen's church, sitting in the back, listening to the choir, learning about faith from people who'd never had his advantages, but had something he was only beginning to understand. Grace. And slowly, carefully, he learned to listen, not just to Ethan, to Naomi, to the families who came to the planning meetings for the center, to the voices he'd spent his life drowning out with control and protocols. One evening, as they reviewed center applications together, Jonathan looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you really come back? You could have refused, could have told me to figure it out myself, but you didn't." Naomi set down her pen. "Because I saw something in you that first day. Under all the control and fear, I saw a father who loved his son so much it terrified him, who was so afraid of failing that he couldn't see he was already succeeding just by caring." She paused. "And I saw someone who reminded me why I do this work, because even the people who seem like they have everything are sometimes the ones who need help the most." Jonathan reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "I'm grateful. For you, for your grandmother, for this second chance." Naomi felt warmth spread through her chest. "So am I." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Then Ethan burst into the room, Mrs. Foster and Helen behind him. "Miss Naomi! Daddy, we made cookies!" The moment broke, but the feeling remained. Something was growing between them. Quiet, patient, real. Something that looked a lot like the beginning of love. 6 months later, the Rebecca Reed Center stood bright and welcoming on 3 acres of donated land. Not glass and steel, brick and wood, with a garden designed by children, a music room with instruments anyone could touch, and windows that let in light without judgment or perfection. Opening day. Naomi stood at the entrance, watching families arrive. Parents with scared eyes, children with silent voices, each one carrying their own grief, their own silence, their own fragile hope. Jonathan stood beside her, Ethan's hand in his. "You ready?" he asked softly. "Are you?" She glanced at him. This isn't about legacy anymore. It's about service. I know. He looked at his son. It's about giving kids like Ethan a place where silence doesn't mean failure, where healing happens at their pace, not ours. Ethan tugged his father's hand. Can I show them now? Jonathan smiled. Go ahead, buddy. Ethan ran inside, confident and whole. Naomi and Jonathan followed. In the main hall, 100 people had gathered. Press, donors, board members, families waiting for miracles. And Helen, seated in the front row beside Mrs. Foster, both wearing their Sunday best and smiles that could light the world. Ethan climbed onto a small stage, picked up a microphone. His hands shook slightly. He looked back at Naomi. She nodded. You've got this. Ethan took a breath and spoke. My name is Ethan Reed. I'm 7 years old. I didn't talk for a long time because I was really, really sad. My mom died and I forgot how to use my words. The room was breathless, everyone leaning forward. But Miss Naomi taught me that it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to take your time. He smiled. She taught me that healing doesn't mean you're not sad anymore. It means you're safe enough to feel everything. Tears streamed down Jonathan's face. He didn't wipe them away. Ethan held up his hand, counted on his fingers. There are 5 things Miss Naomi says love needs: respect, reciprocity, vulnerability, choice, commitment. Big words, but they mean be kind, share, be brave, pick what's right for you, and stay. He looked at his father. My dad is learning those too. He's getting really good at them. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and understanding. Miss Naomi says healing isn't making people talk. It's helping them feel safe enough to speak. Naomi's breath caught, her own words given back to her with perfect clarity. Ethan set down the microphone and gestured. Daddy, come here. Jonathan joined him on stage, uncertain. Ethan took his father's hand, looked out at the crowd. We're going to sing now, the song that helped me find my voice again. And without preamble, father and son began together. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Jonathan's voice cracked on the first line, but Ethan's small hand squeezed his, steadying him, giving him strength. You make me happy when skies are gray. The room joined in. Helen's strong soprano, Mrs. Foster's gentle alto, dozens of voices blending into something powerful and unified. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Naomi sang too, tears streaming, watching the man who'd learned to listen and the boy who'd found his voice and the community forming around them. Please don't take my sunshine away. The final note hung in the air, shimmering. Then Helen stood, clapping. The room erupted in applause that felt less like performance and more like celebration. Like witness. Ethan ran down from the stage and launched himself into Naomi's arms. She caught him, held him, and for a moment they were just teacher and student, healer and healed, found family in the truest sense. Jonathan joined them, pulled them both into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long, painful journey. Over Ethan's head, Naomi looked up at Jonathan, saw the man he'd become, saw the softness he'd rediscovered, saw the beginnings of something that felt like romance, but deeper, like choice, like recognition. Jonathan's hand found hers, squeezed gently. She squeezed back. We choose each other, every day, and that's what makes this real. Later, as the sun set and the last families left, Naomi stood in the music room, alone with her thoughts. She ran her fingers over the piano keys, played 2 notes. C and G, the door opened. Jonathan. Hey. Hey. She turned. Good opening? Inspirational, he said, and smiled. That's the word I keep hearing. Inspirational. Motivational. Like maybe we did something that actually matters beyond quarterly reports and board meetings. We did something that matters, she corrected. You, me, Ethan, Nana Helen, everyone who believed when belief was hard. He crossed to her, stood close but not crowding. Can I ask you something? Always. Why did you come back? Really? Naomi considered, weighing her words. Because Ethan needed me. Because the work mattered. She met his eyes. And because I saw something in you that I think you'd forgotten was there. What's that? Kindness. Real, genuine kindness underneath all that control and fear. The word settled between them, soft and true. Jonathan reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. The not business part. The part where I'm just a person and you're just a person, and there's no contract or protocol or safety net. Then we figure it out together. She smiled. One note at a time, one choice at a time. He kissed her. Gentle, reverent. A question and an answer. When they pulled apart, Ethan was standing in the doorway, grinning widely. Gross, he said, absolutely delighted. They laughed, the sound filling the room with lightness, and in that moment, in the music room of a center built on second chances, in the glow of the setting sun, with a boy who'd found his voice and two adults who'd found each other, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just peace. Joy. The kind of joy that comes from choosing love. From building family, not through blood, but through showing up. Through staying. Helen appeared behind Ethan, Mrs. Foster at her side. You coming to dinner? Helen asked. I made pot roast. Jonathan looked at Naomi. Is that okay? More than okay. Naomi took his hand, took Ethan's hand. Let's go home. And they did, to Helen's small kitchen, where the table was too crowded and the laughter too loud, and everything was absolutely perfect. Because this was what family looked like. Chosen. Built. Earned through heartwarming stories of staying when leaving would be easier. This was romance, not flowers and grand gestures, but quiet moments of choosing each other, again and again. This was home. 1 year later. Jonathan's alarm clock sat on the bedside table, digital numbers glowing in the pre-dawn dark. 5:30 a.m. Rebecca's alarm. The one he'd let ring for 3 years, unable to turn off, unable to move forward. His hand hovered over it, then pressed the button. Silence, not the terrible silence of loss. Not the painful silence of things left unsaid. Just peace. He'd finally learned that silence could be peace, not punishment. Beside him, Naomi stirred. You okay? Yeah. He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something floral and real. Yeah, I am. From down the hall, footsteps. Small and confident. Ethan appeared in the doorway, backpack already on, practically bouncing with energy. Dad, we're going to be late. Miss Naomi has that big speech at the university, remember? Jonathan smiled. Right, the motivational keynote on trauma-informed care. I want to sit in the front row, Ethan announced. Grandma Helen's saving seats. Course you do, baby. Naomi sat up, reached for her robe. Give me 10 minutes. Ethan ran off, singing, You Are My Sunshine, at full volume, Mrs. Foster's voice joining in from the kitchen. Jonathan watched him go, felt the miracle of ordinary mornings. You changed our lives, he said softly. Naomi shook her head. No, we changed each other's lives. That's the difference. That's what makes it real. She was right. She usually was. They dressed in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that held intimacy instead of emptiness. Breakfast was beautiful chaos. Ethan recounting a dream about flying, Helen calling to confirm Sunday dinner plans, Mrs. Foster packing lunches, the center's expansion blueprints scattered across the table. Life, messy and real and whole. As they drove to the university, Naomi in the passenger seat reviewing her speech, Ethan singing in the back, Helen beside him humming harmony, Jonathan felt something settle in his chest. Gratitude. For the day Naomi had knelt in the rain and met his son where he was. For the grandmother who'd taught him that fixing and healing weren't the same. For the boy who'd found his voice, and, in doing so, had given his father permission to find his own. For the woman beside him who'd chosen to stay, who chose him still every single day. They pulled into the parking lot. Ethan unbuckled, bounded out of the car with Helen. Naomi lingered, looked at Jonathan. You coming in? Wouldn't miss it. He took her hand. Though I should warn you, I might cry. That's allowed. She kissed his knuckles. That's encouraged, actually. They walked into the auditorium together. A family. Chosen. Built from silence and song, from mistakes and second chances, from two people brave enough to listen instead of control. On stage, later, Naomi would speak about resilience, about hope, about the revolutionary act of meeting children and adults exactly where they are. She'd talk about how healing isn't linear, how it doesn't follow timelines or protocols or board expectations, how sometimes the person who comes to heal your child ends up teaching you how to be human again. In the front row, Ethan would lean against his father, small hand tucked into large. Jonathan would wipe his eyes, not from sadness, from joy. And Helen, seated beside them, would smile her knowing smile and think, This is what love looks like when you stop trying to fix it and start letting it grow. Later that evening, back home, Jonathan found himself in Ethan's room. His son was already asleep, one arm thrown over the stuffed sunshine that Naomi had given him months ago. Jonathan knelt beside the bed, brushed hair from Ethan's forehead with gentle fingers. Thank you, he whispered, for being brave enough to speak, for teaching me how to listen, for choosing me even when I didn't deserve it. He stood to leave, but paused at the doorway. On the wall hung the drawing, the one with 3 figures. But Ethan had added to it. Now there were 5. The 3 originals, plus Helen and Mrs. Foster. All holding hands. All smiling. Underneath, in Ethan's improving handwriting. My family, my sunshine. Jonathan smiled through tears. Downstairs he found Naomi curled on the couch, reading. She looked up when he entered, closing her book. He asleep? Out cold. Jonathan sat beside her, pulled her close. Thank you. For what? For everything. For seeing us when we couldn't see ourselves. For staying when I gave you every reason to leave. He kissed her temple. For making this house a home again. Naomi set down her book, turned to face him fully. Jonathan Reed, are you getting sentimental on me? Maybe. He smiled. Is that allowed? Always. They sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Outside, fireflies began their evening dance, tiny lights in the darkness. Inside, in the quiet spaces between one breath and the next, 2 hearts beat in rhythm. And somewhere, in the soft darkness, a memory stirred. Not of loss, but of gratitude. For the woman with golden hair who'd taught him about compassion. And for the woman with kind eyes who'd taught him about love. Both would always be his sunshine. But only one was here to hold. And that, he finally understood, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to these heartwarming stories with us tonight. If this story touched you, if Naomi and Jonathan's journey reminded you that healing is possible, that families can be chosen, that love can bloom in unexpected places, would you consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to remember that second chances are real? More stories of hope, romance, and found family are waiting for you here. Until next time, may you always find the courage to listen with your heart, to love with your whole self, and to choose kindness when the world asks for judgment. Good night, and sleep well.